Hello and good day,
Hello.
good evening, good day, good morning.
Evening.
Right, so we'll start from the last paragraph on of the chapter Works and Sacrifice. Starting, the Gita resolves this opposition. Page 112, Essays on the Gita. Works and Sacrifice. The Gita resolves this opposition by insisting that the devas are only forms of the one Deva, the Ishvara, the Lord of all yoga and worship and sacrifice and austerity. So, what is this opposition that the Gita resolves? Anyone can speak? The opposition between the one and the many, Sankhya and yoga. The Gita resolves this opposition by insisting that the devas are only forms of the one Deva, the Ishvara, the Lord of all yoga and worship and sacrifice and austerity. And if it is true that sacrifice offered to the devas leads only to material results and to paradise, as it is said according to Vedism, it is also true that sacrifice offered to the Ishvara leads beyond them to the great liberation. For the Lord and the immutable Brahman are not two different beings, but one and the same being. And whoever strives towards either is striving towards that one divine existence. All works in their totality find their culmination and completeness in the knowledge of the Brahman, of the divine. So all works in their totality find their culmination and completeness in the knowledge of the divine. Sarvam karma philam partha jnana parisampyate. They are not an obstacle, but the way to the supreme knowledge. Thus, this opposition too is reconciled with the help of a large elucidation of the meaning of sacrifice. In fact, its conflict is only a restricted form of the larger opposition between yoga and Sankhya. Vedism is a specialized and narrow form of yoga. The principle of the Vedantists is identical with that of the Sankhyas. For to both the movement of salvation is the recoil of the intelligence, the buddhi, from the differentiating powers of nature, from ego, mind, senses, from the subjective and the objective, and its return to the undifferentiated and the immutable. It is with this object of reconciliation in his mind that the teacher first approaches his statement of the doctrine of sacrifice. So it is with this object of reconciliation between yoga and Sankhya, between the different forms, that it is this reconciliation in his mind and this idea that sacrifice has a much larger meaning. It doesn't only mean Vedic sacrifices, that the teacher first approaches his statement of the doctrine of sacrifice. But throughout, even from the very beginning, he keeps his eye not on the restricted Vedic sense of sacrifice and works, but on their larger and universal application. And that widening of the narrow and formal notions to admit the great general truths they unduly restrict, which is always the method of the Gita. So this is the end of chapter Works and Sacrifice. I just wanted to read that because it is a continuation now to chapter 10 and 12, which is the significance of sacrifice. The Gita's theory of sacrifice is stated in two separate passages. One we find in the 3rd chapter, another in the 4th. The first gives it in language which might, taken by itself, seem to be speaking only of the ceremonial sacrifice. The second, interpreting that into the sense of a large philosophical symbolism, transforms at once its whole significance and raises it to a plane of high psychological and spiritual truth. So Gita's theory of sacrifice is in two separate passages, one in the 3rd and the other in the 4th. The first speaking of ceremonial sacrifice, and the second interpreting it into a large philosophical symbolism, psychological and spiritual truth. So in quotation marks, this is a direct translation. With sacrifice, the Lord of creatures of old created creatures and said, "By this shall you bring forth fruits or offspring. By this shall you bring forth in brackets fruits or offspring. Let this be your milker of desires. Foster by this the gods, and let the gods foster you. Fostering each other, you shall attain to the supreme good. Fostered by sacrifice, the gods shall give you desired enjoyments. Who enjoys their given enjoyments and has not given to them, he is a thief." So this is the more ritualistic meaning, is more ceremonial meaning of sacrifice, which is a direct translation of the Sanskrit shloka. So, foster by this the gods, and let the gods foster you. Fostering each other, you shall attain to the supreme good. Fostered by sacrifice, the God shall give you desired enjoyments. Who enjoys their given enjoyments and has not given to them, he is a thief. The good who eat what is left from the sacrifice are released from all sin. But evil are they and enjoy sin who cook the food for their own sake. From food, creatures come into being. From rain is the birth of food. From sacrifice comes into being the rain. Sacrifice is born of work. Work know to be born of Brahman. Brahman is born of the immutable. Therefore is the all-pervading Brahman established in the sacrifice. Very interesting analogy and very true, and also has its wider significance, which he will bring out. So from food, creatures come into being. From rain is the birth of food. From sacrifice comes into being the rain. Sacrifice is born of work. Work know to be born of Brahman. So what is work? Work know to be born of Brahman, and Brahman is born of the immutable. Therefore is the all-pervading Brahman established in the sacrifice. He who follows not here the wheel thus set in movement, evil is his being. So he who follows not here the wheel thus set in movement, Evil is his being. Sensual is his delight. In vain, O Partha, that man lives. Close inverted commas. So having just thus stated the necessity of sacrifice, we shall see thereafter in what sense we may understand a passage which seems at first sight to convey only a traditional theory of ritualism and the necessity of the ceremonial offering. Krishna proceeds to state the superiority of the spiritual man to works. But the man whose delight is in the self and who is satisfied with the enjoyment of the self, and in the self he is content, for him there exists no work that needs to be done. He has no object here to be gained by action done, and none to be gained by action undone. He has no dependence on all these existences for any object to be gained. So, here then are the two ideals, Vedist and Vedantist, standing as if in all their sharp, original separation and opposition. On one side, the active ideal of acquiring enjoyments here and the highest good beyond by sacrifice, and the mutual dependence of the human being and the divine powers, and on the other, facing it, the austerer ideal of the liberated man who, independent in the spirit, has nothing to do with enjoyment or works or the human or the divine worlds, but exists only in the peace of the Supreme Self, joys only in the calm joy of the Brahman. So here are the two ideals. What is the first ideal? Vedist, and the second is Vedantist. So the Vedist ideal is the enjoyment of works through sacrifice, and the Vedantist is the liberated man, independent in spirit, who has nothing to do with enjoyment or works, human or divine worlds, but exists only in the peace of the Supreme Self. Joys only in the calm joy of the Brahman. The next verses create a ground for the reconciliation between the two extremes. The secret is not inaction as soon as one turns towards the higher truth, but desireless action. So the secret, so this is the reconciliation between the two extremes, the Vedist and the Vedantist. These are the two extremes. So what is the secret? The secret is not inaction as soon as one turns towards the higher truth, but desireless action. Action, not inaction. Both before and after it is realized, it is reached. The liberated man has nothing to gain by action, but nothing also to gain by inaction, and it is not at all for any personal object that he has to make his choice. Therefore, without attachment, perform ever the work that is to be done, done for the sake of the world, loka sangraha, as is made clear immediately afterward. For by doing work without attachment, man attains to the highest. For it was even by works that Janaka and the rest attained to perfection. Here again, there's a quotation mark, so direct translation of the Sanskrit shloka. Therefore, without attachment, perform ever the work that is to be done for the sake of the world, as is made clear immediately afterwards. For by doing work without attachment, man attains to the highest. For it was even by works that Janaka and the rest attained to perfection. Close inverted commas. So are you with me so far, or any questions or any comments? Or Any? Yeah? Okay. So it is true that works and sacrifice, it is true that works and sacrifice are a means of arriving at the highest good, Shreya, Param, Avapyastate. Now where is that? She's not here. Avapyastate. Okay, so it is true that works and sacrifice are the means of arriving at the highest good. Now, but there are three kinds of works. That done without sacrifice, for personal enjoyment, which is entirely selfish. So what is this work that is done without sacrifice? That is for personal enjoyment which is entirely selfish and egoistic and misses the true law and aim and utility of life. Mogham prapartha sa jivati. That done with desire, but with sacrifice and the enjoyment only as a result of sacrifice. So the second is the work done with desire, again, not without desire, but with sacrifice and the enjoyment only as a result of sacrifice, and therefore to that extent consecrated and sanctified. And that, the last, done, the three types of works, and the last, that done, that work done, without desire or attachment of any kind. So these are the three kinds of works that are done, but that he speaks about here. The first work is totally done with desire and without any kind of sacrifice, as a personal enjoyment, entirely selfish, egoistic. Second, done with desire but with sacrifice, and the enjoyment coming as a result of the sacrifice, and therefore to that extent consecrated and sanctified. And that third work, that work done without desire or attachment of any kind, it is the last which brings the soul of man to the highest. Param apnoti purushaya. So param apnoti purushaya. So the whole sense and drift of this teaching turns upon the interpretation we are to give to the important words yajna, karma, brahma, sacrifice, work, Brahman. So this whole drift and the sense of the teaching of the Gita is hinged upon the interpretation we give to the three important words of yajna, karma, brahma, which is sacrifice is yajna, work is karma, and Brahman is Brahma. If the sacrifice is simply the Vedic sacrifice, if the work from which it is born is the Vedic rule of works, and if the Brahman from which the work itself is born is the Shabda Brahman in the sense only of the letter of the Veda, then all the positions of the Vedist dogma are conceded, and there is nothing more. So, what is the Vedist dogma? If the sacrifice is simply the Vedic sacrifice, if the work from which it is born is the Vedic rule of works, and if the Brahman from which the work itself is born is the Shabda Brahman, the chanting of the verses of the Vedas, which is the ritualistic chanting, Shabda Brahman in the sense only of the letter of the Veda, then all the positions of the Vedist dogma are conceded, and there is nothing more. So ceremonial sacrifice is the right means of gaining children, wealth, enjoyment. So what is this this ceremonial sacrifice, which is the ceremonial yajna, which is even what we see today, why, so many people call pandits to their homes and do these yajnas and, ritualistic, rituals. And that is the right, ceremonial sacrifice is the right means of gaining children, wealth, enjoyment. By ceremonial sacrifice, rain is brought down from heaven, and the prosperity and continuity of the race assured. Life is a continual transaction between the gods and men, in which man offers ceremonial gifts to the gods from the gifts they have bestowed on him. So, in this aspect, in any case, life is a continual transaction because of the way that the Vedic sacrifices and the mantras and the way that the ritualistic practices are arranged and organized. It is a transaction that I give you this and you give me that. I will cut off my hair and put my hair in Tirupati, or I will do this and I will do that. I will give so much money and so much, feed so many Brahmins and go to the temple and do this and do that. But instead, in that you give me a child or you give me whatever, So this is it's a transactional process. Ceremonial sacrifice is the right means of gaining children, wealth, enjoyment. By ceremonial sacrifice, rain is brought down from heaven, and the prosperity and continuity of the race assured. Life is a continual transaction between the gods and men, in which man offers ceremonial gifts to the gods from the gifts they have bestowed on him, and in return is enriched, protected, fostered. Enriched, protected, fostered. Therefore, all human works have to be accompanied and turned into a sacrament by ceremonial sacrifice and ritualistic worship. Therefore, all human works have to be accompanied and turned into a sacrament by ceremonial sacrifice and ritualistic worship. Work not so dedicated is accursed. Enjoyment without previous ceremonial sacrifice and ritual consecration is a sin. Even salvation, even the highest good, is to be gained by ceremonial sacrifice. It must never be abandoned.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, in the previous class, we discussed how the Gita says that everything should be an offering to the divine, and that is how it becomes sacred and pure, and you are able to detach from it. So, is the doing of the sacrifice with the same purpose that you're offering it, and that it became transactional in nature because of the practice that's happening or the way it's happening, but actually the thought behind is the offering?
So therefore, this falls into the second. There are three kinds of works, or three kinds of sacrifices one can do. Or one is no sacrifice, where one is you only do for yourself, egoism. The second is you do have some transactional sacrifice for a ceremonial, ritualistic, where you are offering, you are sacrificing, but for some gain. And that is the second. So that is more the ritualistic one. So, and the third is when you have no gain in mind, and you're not sacrificing to gain something,
And
you're not making any demands, and there is no attachment, right? So, therefore, all human works have to be accompanied and turned into a sacrament by ceremonial sacrifice and ritualistic worship. Work not so dedicated is accursed. Enjoyment without previous ceremonial sacrifice and ritual consecration is a sin. And if you see, religion demands that from us, doesn't it? in our religious practices. We do have ceremonial sacrifice. And it is a way of conceding that there is that there is a certain sacrifice that is required in offering. But because of its very nature, it becomes ritualistic and transactional. Yeah?
Religion is mostly transactional.
Sorry?
Religion that is practiced is
Yeah, so when you call the Pandit, you're having bad luck. I mean, there's some bad tithi going on, and we are getting these so many, whatever it might be, business problems, or you see the reason why we call mostly. Now those in the third category, you don't need to do that. What the Gita is teaching, or what Sri Aurobindo is in saying, is that what what Krishna is doing is he is slowly taking Arjuna towards the different gradations of sacrifice. As our soul evolves, as we as human beings evolve, we also need to follow the law of graduality. So this second form of sacrifice is very important for those who want to reach the third and are not ready for the third, and definitely have gone beyond the first. So these are ways. Nothing is bad or good.
Because I think
They're all required.
the second one is a little simplistic in the sense, therefore people who cannot do a lot of abstract thinking, or
Yes.
who cannot have very high intellectual
Correct.
level, so at least you're giving something.
At least the beginning of that offering has started. Yeah, that's it. Right. Therefore, all human works have to be accompanied and turned into a sacrament by ceremonial sacrifice and ritualistic worship. Work not so dedicated is accursed. Enjoyment without previous ceremonial sacrifice and ritual consecration is a sin. Even salvation, even the highest good, is to be gained by ceremonial sacrifice. It must never be abandoned. Even the seeker of liberation has to continue to do ceremonial sacrifice, although without attachment. It is by ceremonial sacrifice and ritualistic works done without attachment that men of the type of Janaka attained to spiritual perfection and liberation. So this ceremonial sacrifice and ritualistic works done without attachment is what that men of the type of Janak, King Janak, attain to spiritual perfection. So this can be used. Ceremonial sacrifice can be used as a method for liberation and salvation here. What Sri Krishna is saying, it's not that you can't. It can be used, but then it should be done without attachment. Without attachment means without transactional. Yeah. Obviously, this cannot be the meaning of the Gita. For it would be in contradiction with all the rest of the book. Now, here is what Sri Aurobindo is saying, that obviously this cannot only be the meaning that you have to perform ceremonial sacrifices. Cannot be the meaning of the Gita. Sorry. Obviously, this cannot be the meaning of the Gita, for it would be in contradiction with the rest of the book. Even in the passage itself, without the illumining interpretation afterwards given to it in the 4th chapter, we have already an indication of a wider sense, where it is said the sacrifice is born from work, work from Brahman, Brahman from the Akshara, and therefore the all-pervading Brahman, Sarvagatam Brahma, is established in the sacrifice. So he says already you can sense even in the 2nd chapter that there is a hint of a wider meaning to the word sacrifice. It's not purely ceremonial sacrifice, ritualistic sacrifice that is meant in the Gita when it speaks about the significance of sacrifice. There is a deeper meaning. And what is that? Why? You can sense it from these words. There is a wider sense where it is said that sacrifice is born from work. And what is work born from? Work from Brahman. If work is born from Brahman, sacrifice is born from work, work from Brahman, and Brahman from the Akshara. That is and therefore the all-pervading Brahman, Sarvagatam Brahma, is established in the sacrifice. The connecting logic of the therefore and the repetition of the word Brahma are significant. For it shows clearly that the Brahman from which all work is born has to be understood with an eye not so much to the current Vedic teaching, in which it means the Veda, as to the symbolical sense in which the creative word is identical with the all-pervading Brahman, the eternal, the one self present in all existences, Sarva Bhuteshu, and present in all the workings of existence. So, the connecting logic of therefore, the all-pervading Brahman, Sarvagatam Brahma, is established in the sacrifice. This, therefore, the repetition of the word Brahma are significant, for it shows clearly that the Brahman from which all work is born has to be understood with an eye not so much the current Vedic teaching, in which it means the Veda, as to the symbolical sense in which the creative word is identical with the all-pervading Brahman, the eternal, the one self, present in all existences, Sarva Bhuteshu, and present in all the workings of existence. The Veda is the knowledge of the divine, the eternal. I am He who is to be known in all the books of the knowledge. Vede Sa Vedai, Krishna will say in a subsequent chapter, I am He who is to be known in all the books of knowledge. But it is the knowledge of Him in the workings of Prakriti, in the workings of the three gunas, first qualities or modes of nature, tre gunya vishyase veda. So it is the workings of, but it is, what is this knowledge? I am He who is to be known in all the books of knowledge, but he says it is the knowledge of Him in the workings of Prakriti, in nature, on earth, in life, in the workings of the three gunas, first qualities or modes of nature. Tre gunya avishvaya veda. This Brahman or divine in the workings of nature is born. So this Brahman or divine in the workings of Prakriti is born. As we may say, out of the Akshara into the Shara. The Akshara, the immutable, and the Shara is the mutable. So the Akshara, out of the Akshara, the immutable Purusha, the self who stands above all the modes or qualities or workings of nature, Nistre Gunya. The Brahman is one, but self-displayed in two aspects. So the Brahman is one, but self-displayed in two aspects. The immutable being, Akshara, and the creator and the originator of works in the mutable becoming, Kshara, Atman, Sarvabhutani. It is the immobile, omnipresent soul of things, and it is the spiritual principle of the mobile working of things. So both. So the Brahman is one, but self-displayed in two aspects. The immutable and the mutable. Okay? It is the immobile, omnipresent soul of things, and it is the spiritual principle of the mobile working of things. Purusha poised in himself, and Purusha active in Prakriti. It is Akshara and Shara. In both of these aspects, the divine being, Purushottam, manifests himself in the universe. In both of these aspects, the divine being Purushottama, manifests himself in the universe. The immutable above all qualities is his poise of peace, self-possession, equality, samam brahma. From that proceeds his manifestation in the qualities of Prakriti and their universal workings. From the Purusha in Prakriti, from this Brahman with qualities, proceed all the works of the universal energy, karma, in man and in all existences. So these are this is a clear, what should I say, understanding of what is the Shara and the Akshara, the Brahman, that is both in immutable and mutable, both above and in the gunas and within nature and within Prakriti, and in the Purusha in the Prakriti and the immutable Purusha. So this is very important to understand, because then you have a link between why work. Why? The question comes, why is work born from the Brahman? How is that works is so important, that through works one can get liberated? Why is Sri Krishna asking Arjuna and the whole Gita a gospel of works? What is the significance of work? You see? What is the significance of work? Has anyone gleaned from what we've read now? Can explain in one line? So significance of works is offering is a yes, but the origin of work is divine. The origin of work is the Brahman. Works comes from the Brahman. So the father, the progenitor of work is Brahman. And therefore, when one offers one's work, one can connect back to the source of work, which is the Brahman, and go to the immutable from the mutable. And therefore, one can use work or karma as a method and path for liberation and for for realization. One can become the divine. One can do works and have the divine nature on earth. Otherwise, how do you get the divine nature, and how do you transform the gunas from their lower form bound in Prakriti to the higher form of the Purusha sitting within? How do you get to that? Are these questions? Yes? Is that clear? So they're extremely important, this understanding, because then you can understand.
So you're going from the first level of doing things for hedonistic pleasure to the second of transactional sacrifice to the third of offering with devotion, and through that you're connecting yourself to the divine, because that is the source of all work.
Yeah, so that is of course a law of graduality, how you do it. But the fact remains that the source of all works, you see, that's why he says, this is the most important thing he says. We have already an indication of a wider sense where it is said that sacrifice is born from work. If there was no work, where would there be sacrifice? Work is born from Brahman. Brahman from the Akshara, from that is immutable, and therefore the all-pervading Brahman, Sarvagatam Brahma, is established in the sacrifice. Because work comes from Brahman, so Brahman in the sacrifice is established, this all-pervading Brahman. The connecting logic of the therefore and the repetition of the word Brahma are significant, for it shows clearly that the Brahman from which all work is born has to be understood with an eye not so much to the current Vedic teaching, but but in a symbolical sense in which the creative word is identical with the all-pervading Brahman, the eternal, the one self, present in all existences, sarva bhuteshu, and present in all the workings of existence. The Vedas, the knowledge of the divine, eternal. I am he who is to be known in all the books of knowledge. And then, in subsequent chapters, Sri Krishna says, but it is the knowledge of him in the workings of Prakriti, in the workings of the three gunas, first qualities or modes of nature. This Brahman or divine in the workings of nature is born. As we may say, out of the Akshara, the immutable Purusha, the self who stands above all the modes of qualities or workings of nature, the Brahman is one but self-displayed in two aspects, the immutable being and the creator and originator of works. Well, what is the immutable Brahman? That is the creator and originator of works. And in the mutable becoming, the Atman, Sarva Bhutani, it is the immobile, omnipresent soul of things, and it is the spiritual principle of the mobile working of things, Purusha, poised in himself, and Purusha, active in Prakriti. It is Akshara and Shara. In both of these aspects, the divine being, Purushottam, manifests himself in the universe. In both these aspects, it manifests in the universe. Okay, as the Shara and the Akshara. The immutable above all qualities is his poise of peace, self-possession, equality, samam brahma. From that proceeds his manifestation in the qualities of Prakriti and their universal workings. From the Purusha in Prakriti, from this Brahman with qualities proceed all works of the universal energy, karma, in man and in all existences. From that work proceeds the principle of sacrifice. Even the material interchange between gods and men proceeds upon this principle, as typified in the dependence of rain and its product food on this working, and on them the physical birth of creatures. Right? So even the physical, even the material interchange between gods and men proceeds upon the same principle, as typified in the dependence of rain and its product food on this working, and on them the physical birth of creatures. For all the working of Prakriti is in its true nature a sacrifice. So now here he comes to this main thought. For all the working of Prakriti, it is in its true nature a sacrifice, a yagna, with the divine being as the enjoyer of all energisms and works and sacrifice, and the great Lord of all existences. Bhuktaram yagnata pasam sarvaloka maheshwaram, and to know this divine, all-pervading and established in sacrifice, sarvagatam yagna pratishtatam, is the true, the Vedic knowledge. So there's a note, I think somewhere, which I should, here. There's a note on this in the qualities of Prakriti and the universal workings. From the Purusha and Prakriti, from the Brahman with qualities proceed all works. That this is the right interpretation results also from the opening of the 8th chapter, where the universal principles are enumerated. Akshara Brahma, Swabhava, Karma, Shara, Bhava, Purusha, Adhiyagna. Akshara is the immutable Brahman, spirit or self, Atman. Swabhava is the principle of the self, Adhyatma, operative as the original nature of the being, own way of becoming, and this proceeds out of the self, the Akshara. Karma proceeds from that and is the creative movement. Visarga, which brings all natural beings and all changing subjective and objective shapes of being into existence. The result of karma, therefore, is all this mutable becoming, the changes of nature developed out of the original self-nature, Sharabhava out of Swabhava. Purusha is the soul, the divine element in the becoming. Adhidayavata, by whose presence the working of karma become a sacrifice, yagna to the divine within. Adhiyagna is the secret divine who receives the sacrifice. So this is a note on all the, on what we've just read. And this is the right interpretation, results also from the opening of the 8th chapter. So here I think what Sri Aurobindo has done in this note is connected this chapter to the 8th chapter, where all of these is again spoken of by Sri Krishna. Right, so any questions or any comments here before we continue? Is this clear?
I have one question.
Yes.
So, the sacrifice being mentioned, what are the types of sacrifice? It is physical sacrifice, it is mental sacrifice, or it is going to be a divine mantra, relationship, attachment sacrifice.
Physical sacrifice, you mean by what? You mean like
burning your body, or like
burning your body?
When going to Mata Vaishno Devi, they walk like barefooted.
Right. So you ask, what is your question again? What is the question?
What is the type of sacrifice
That he means here?
Yes.
Okay. So here he is talking about ritualistic sacrifice. Well, he first talks about 3 kinds of works. Then he says there are 3 kinds of ways of one is no sacrifice, like egoistic, doing all work for oneself. Second is ceremonial sacrifice. He's talking about yagna. The ritual sacrifice which you put on the fire, and you give ahuti, and then you give material possessions, and then you pray to the divine for progeny, for wealth, for enjoyment, for health, and all this. So he's talking about that kind of sacrifice. And then he says that then the next is level of, and I suppose what you're mentioning is walking to Vaishno Devi barefoot, or doing austerities is what you're discussing and describing. Any kind of self-imposed austerity that you put on yourself to attain a certain goal is also part of what he would define as the second method or second form of sacrifice, which is basically, he's saying the first form is there's full of desire, you do all works for yourself egoistically, there's no sacrifice, and the sense in your being there is nothing that you offer. The second is you understand that life is a transaction. You understand there is a transaction between men and the gods. So therefore you give to get, and they receive to give. That transaction takes place between, and that is done through ritualistic sacrifice, or what you call austerities. You can also do it through, walking to Vaishno Devi, or like all these people walk, on the roads with those things, kavas and all that. There's so many different forms. And then there's the third, which is sacrifice, where you offer yourself and your work, but without any desire for any return or fruit or attachment for any kind of recompense or fruit, for any kind. Like you are not sacrificing because you want to lead, you want more wealth, or you want more children, or you want more peace, or you want more whatever it might be. So that is the third form of sacrifice. Okay?
Correct, yes.
All right. So then he also then describes, which we just spoke about, how sacrifice is born of Brahman, and therefore sacrifice is something that is in a sense, willingly or unwillingly, we have to sacrifice. We are made to sacrifice, to make sacred. But those who are conscious do it willingly and consciously. Those who are not do it unconsciously. So, let's now continue. But he may be known. Where are we? Let me just take the last words. For all the workings of Prakriti is in its true nature. For all the workings of Prakriti, or is in its true nature a sacrifice, a yajna, with the divine being as the enjoyer of all energies. So whatever we do actually is a sacrifice. Whether we know it, we are made to sacrifice. And who is the enjoyer of all our sacrifices? It is the divine being as the enjoyer of all energisms and works and sacrifice and the great Lord of all existences. So Bhuktaram Yagna Tapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, and to know this divine, all-pervading and established in sacrifice, Sarvagatam Yagna Pratishtatam, is the true, the Vedic knowledge. To know this divine, all-pervading, established in sacrifice. But he may be known in an inferior action through the Devas. Now this Sarva Brahman may also be known through an inferior action through the Devas. Who are the Devas? The gods, Vaishnu Devi. Whoever our gods we worship, they are the Devas. So you can either go to the Akshara, to the immutable Brahma, the source, Brahman, or you can go through the intermediary of the gods. That's what he's saying. But he may be known in an inferior action through the Devas, the gods, the powers of the divine soul in man, in nature.
Sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt. So the divine, the Akshara, who is immutable, is considered to not have a form.
Yes.
Right? And the gods, they have a
forms.
form, a human.
Correct.
And so they are mutable.
So they are the gods, they are the devas. So they are obviously they are not that which is immutable is something that encompasses everything.
So they're divine, but not overarching.
No. The mutable Brahman actually he means more as the Jivatman and the Atman. That is called what he's calling the mutable Brahman here. The Devas are the intermediaries between the Purushottam and But he may be known in an inferior action through the Devas, the gods, the powers of the divine soul in nature, and in the eternal interaction of these powers and the soul of man, mutually giving and receiving, mutually helping, increasing, raising each other's workings and satisfaction, a commerce in which man rises towards a growing fitness for the supreme good. He recognizes that his life is a part of this divine action in nature. So man recognizes that his life is a part of this divine action in nature, and not a thing separate and to be held and pursued for its own sake. So this is the law of evolution, the law of nature is giving and receiving. And man realizes that he is a part of this divine action in nature and not separate. He regards his enjoyments and the satisfaction of his desires as the fruit of sacrifice and the gift of the gods in their divine universal workings, and he ceases to pursue them in the false and evil spirit of sinful, egoistic selfishness, as if they were a good to be seized from life by his own unaided strength, without return and without thankfulness. So this certain asuric, what they call, egoistic, where you think that it is you and you grab from it and you do not understand that you are part of a process of a mutuality of nature and the divine, then you become sinful, egoistic, selfish, as if they were a good to be seized from life by his own unaided strength, without return and without thankfulness, without gratitude. As this spirit increases in him, he subordinates his desires, becomes satisfied with sacrifice as the law of life, and is content with whatever remains over from the sacrifice. So, when he ceases to pursue these things in the false and evil spirit of sinful egoisticness, in that measure, as his spirit increases, the spirit of giving, of self-giving, of offering, of making sacred of his life and his work, as that spirit increases in him, he begins to subordinate his own desires, becomes satisfied with the sacrifice as the law of life and works, and is content with whatever remains over from the sacrifice, giving up all the rest freely as an offering in the great and beneficent interchange between his life and the world life. Whoever goes contrary to this law of action and pursues works and enjoyment for his own isolated personal self-interest lives in vain. He misses the true meaning and aim and utility of living and the upward growth of the soul. He is not on the path which leads to the highest good, but the highest only comes when the sacrifice is no longer to the gods, but to the one all-pervading divine established in the sacrifice, of whom the gods are inferior forms and powers. And when he puts away the lower self that desires and enjoys and gives up his personal sense of being the worker to the true executrix of all works, Prakriti, and his personal sense of being the enjoyer to the divine Purusha, the higher and universal self, who is the real enjoyer of the works of Prakriti. In that self, and not in any personal enjoyment, he finds now his soul satisfaction, complete content, pure delight. He has nothing to gain by action or inaction, depends neither on gods nor men for anything, seeks no profit from any, for the sake of the divine only, but does works, seeks no profit from any, for the self-delight is all sufficient to him. Self-delight. But does works, and does all his works, does works for the sake of the divine only, as a pure sacrifice, without attachment or desire. Thus he gains, and then as to the measure in which he is able to do this, he gains equality and becomes free from the modes of nature, the three gunas, and rises above sattva, rajas and tamas, nistreya gunya. His soul takes its poise not in the insecurity of Prakriti, but in the peace of the immutable Brahman, even while his actions continue in the movement of Prakriti. Thus is sacrifice his way of attaining to the highest. So we will stop here. This is very, very important, this last, in fact, whatever we've read is extremely important, and very, very important to dwell on, to meditate, to read again. I don't want to rush through it. I think a second reading, second listening, whatever, would be very useful for us all. And if we could meditate on this, to really let this knowledge seep into our consciousness, to be able to deeply understand what it means and then see what it does to us. Anything before we end? Any other questions or comments? All right.
Yeah, I had one
Yes.
thought that this caused me to think about the fact that that we get born in the world, it's not of our own choice, and that the purpose for our being here is because of the divine. So there's no option really for any kind of selfish action. All action should be unselfish because we didn't cause any of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything, there's a purpose for us being here, but it wasn't our intention. It was the divine that did that. And so the only thing that we really have any validity in doing is complete selfless action. Just whatever action the divine causes us to perform or to do.
Yes.
So just thinking about that we really don't have much to do with all of this, except, our own internal offering, our internal sacrifice.
Yes, that's true. So,
Just a thought.
yes. So it's important to understand that, once we understand the principle of sacrifice, that is a principle in life and in work and in all beings, where the only choice we have is whether we are conscious of it or do it unconsciously. We don't have a choice, we have to sacrifice. But the unconscious sacrifice is that sacrifice that is done with a sense of the word sacrifice in its meaning of suffering, of giving up. But a conscious offering is different. It's joyous. It's conscious. It's being done with a consciousness of why we're doing it and to whom we're doing it. But the only way we can become liberated and become, we can gain the knowledge of the divine consciousness is by giving up the ego. Now, the ego cannot dissolve or get sublimated unless we rise above the three gunas of Prakriti. And the three gunas of Prakriti are so entrenched in our lives, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, that the only way that these three wonderful, this triplet can ever be risen above is through us becoming one with the Purusha and rising above the three of Prakriti. And the way to do it is the way that the Gita teaches us, is through offering sacrifice done consciously. And the more conscious we are in doing that, the more we will be able to do it with a sense of self-delight, in delight, not suffering. Okay. So this is a law, and now we shall meditate. So we took the paragraph before the one we stopped on, which starts with, "But he may be known in an inferior action through the Devas," chapter 12. You all found it? "But he may be known in an inferior action through the Devas, the gods, the powers of the divine soul in nature, and in the eternal interaction of these powers and the soul of man, mutually giving and receiving, mutually helping, increasing, raising each other's workings, and satisfaction, a commerce in which man rises towards a growing fitness for the supreme good. He recognizes that his life is a part of this divine action in nature and not a thing separate and to be held and pursued for its own sake. He regards his enjoyments and satisfaction of his desires as the fruit of sacrifice and the gift of the gods in their divine universal workings, and he ceases to pursue them in the false and in the eternal interaction of these powers and the soul of man. Mutually giving and receiving, mutually helping, increasing, raising each other's workings and satisfaction, a commerce in which man rises towards a growing fitness. Yes?
Excuse, sorry to interrupt, but I'm missing these lines. I don't know. I'm missing these lines actually, because he regards his enjoyments and satisfactions of his desires as the fruit of sacrifice and the gift of the gods in their divine universal workings, and he ceases to pursue them. I think either you missed some lines or
No,
I'm
I'm on top. I haven't reached those lines.
oh,
Okay, now I must tell you, I'm reading from my Kindle. This is obviously the essays on the Gita. I don't know which version it is, but I have, I have it on my Kindle, essays on the Gita. So you'll have to just,
okay.
maybe there's a
Okay.
slight difference in the way that, but it's all there. I don't know how they.
Okay.
Yeah. So, other people also have the same problem with the words?
Yes.
There's a difference?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and in the eternal interaction of these powers in the soul of man, mutually giving and receiving, mutually helping, increasing, raising each other's workings and satisfaction, a commerce in which man rises towards a growing fitness for the supreme good. He recognizes that his life is a part of this divine action in nature, and not a thing separate, and to be held and pursued for its own sake. He regards his enjoyments and the satisfaction of his desires as the fruit of sacrifice and the gift of the gods in their divine universal workings, and he ceases to pursue them in the false and evil spirit of sinful, egoistic selfishness, as if they were a good to be seized from life by his own unaided strength, without return and without thankfulness. Are we all together? Yeah? As this spirit increases in him, he subordinates his desires, becomes satisfied with sacrifice as the law of life, and works, and is content with whatever remains over from the sacrifice, giving up all the rest freely as an offering in the great and beneficent interchange between his life and the world life. Whatever goes contrary to this law of action and pursues works and enjoyments for his own isolated personal interest lives in vain. He misses the true meaning and aim and utility of living. He misses the true meaning and aim and utility of living and the upward growth of the soul. He is not on the path which leads to the highest good, but the highest only comes when the sacrifice is no longer to the gods, but to the one all-pervading divine established in the sacrifice, of whom the gods are inferior forms and powers. And when he puts away the lower self, that desires and enjoys and gives up his personal sense of being, the worker, and gives up his personal sense of being the worker to the true executrix of all works, Prakriti, and his personal sense of being the enjoyer to the divine Purusha, the higher and universal self, who is the real enjoyer of the works of Prakriti. In that self, and not in any personal enjoyment, he finds now his soul satisfaction, complete content, pure delight. He has nothing to gain by action or inaction, depends neither on gods nor man for anything, seeks no profit from any, for the self-delight is all sufficient to him, but does works for the sake of the divine only, as a pure sacrifice, without attachment or desire. Thus he gains equality and becomes free from the modes of nature, Nistraygunya. His soul takes its poise not in the insecurity of Prakriti, but in the peace of the immutable Brahman, even while his actions continue in the movement of Prakriti. This is sacrifice, his way of attaining, thus is sacrifice his way of attaining to the highest. So the importance here of the two problems and issues, which is attachment and desire. Giving up without attachment, to do works without attachment or desire. This is very, very important, because as long as work is done with attachment and desire, whether that desire is a selfish one or self-aggrandizing and so on, the work is not a true sacrifice and a complete sacrifice. There is some form of sacrifice and interchange at all times, but the differences between conscious offering and sacrifice and making sacred of one's work, of one's actions, of one's life, of one's thought, and the unconscious one, which is sort of is willy-nilly demanded from all living beings by nature, without which the world does not function. Don't forget, the first sacrifice was the Holocaust of the Divine Mother into creation, and it is her sacrifice that to come down in creation that created the world and earth, and therefore the sacrifice is a law of nature and a law of being. So, any questions here or issues before we continue?
I was just thinking that if we live like this, then we live harmoniously, and we do the will of the divine. If we don't do that, then we basically suffer. You know, where there's inharmony, so there's really a choice. What do we want to do? Do we want to suffer and have chaos in our lives with, you know, ups and downs, any and everywhere? Or if we can actually walk this path, then we can live perfectly as we can in this world.
Suffering is one of the issues that happen when we are unable to live from the highest and to offer to the divine, and we forget, and we start, and therefore worry, suffering, tension, anxiety. These are the things that happen. So that this is the sense of the passage is made clear in what follows. So here also the idea that there is the sacrifice that we can make to the gods, and there is the sacrifice that we can make to that is the Purushottam, above the gods, to the highest. And the two are slightly different in frequency and in quality. So that this is the sense of the passage is made clear in what follows by the affirmation of Lok Samgraha as the object of works, of Prakriti as the sole doer of works, and the divine Purusha as their equal upholder, to whom works have to be done, to whom works have to be given up, even in their doing. So this idea of Lok Samgraha as the object of works, of Prakriti as the sole doer of works. Now the problem is because of the ego principle in human nature and in the human being, even if one mentally knows that the work is not done by I or me or oneself, it's very difficult to translate that knowledge or that information into a practical change of nature wherein one is aware when one is doing the works that it is Prakriti who is doing the work. It is Purusha who is behind Prakriti, and Prakriti and Purusha both are embedded in the divine. One of the most beautiful things that I've been meditating on, which actually one read in the essays, I don't know whether we read it or it's going to come up, is that at one place Aurobindo says that we think that the soul is in the body, but in actual fact it's the opposite, it's the inverse. It is the body that is in the soul. It is our body that is in the soul. It is the mind that is in the soul. It is the vital and the emotional being that is in the soul. It is the soul that encapsulates the material body. So it's, because of the ego principle, everything is inverted, including the fact that we do not really understand or can totally begin to function from the idea that we don't work at all. It is Prakriti that works through us. Okay, so let us continue. That this is the sense of the passage is made clear in what follows by the affirmation of Lok Samgraha as the object of works, of Prakriti as the sole doer of works, and the divine Purusha as their equal upholder, to whom works have to be given up, even in their doing. This inner giving up of works, not outer, please note. It is this inner giving up of works. And yet, physical doing of them is the culmination of sacrifice. So one says, when give up work is not to give up attachment to work is not to give up work itself, but to give up the to be not inwardly attached and inwardly consumed by it. So this inner giving up of works and offering them, and yet physical doing of them is the culmination of sacrifice. And by the affirmation that the result of such active sacrifice with an equal and desireless mind is liberation from the bondage of works. So and what is the result? And by the affirmation that the result of such active sacrifice, with an active sacrifice or conscious sacrifice, with an equal and desireless mind, is liberation from the bondage of works. He who is satisfied with whatever gain comes to him, and equal in failure and success, is not bound even when he acts. When a man liberated, free from attachment, acts for sacrifice all his action is dissolved. So when a man liberated, free from attachment, acts for sacrifice, all his action is dissolved, leaves, that is to say, no result of bondage or after impression on his free, pure, perfect, and equal soul. To these passages we shall have to return. They are followed by a perfectly explicit and detailed interpretation of the meaning of yajna in the language of the Gita, which leaves no doubt at all about the symbolic use of the words and the psychological character of the sacrifice explained by this teaching. So he says we come back to it, but from this it is very clear, it's perfectly explicit that the meaning of yajna in the language of the Gita is not just, is a symbolic use of the words. Also, not just the physical yajna. Okay, leaves no doubt at all about the symbolic use of the words and the psychological character of the sacrifice, the inner sacrifice, enjoined by this teaching. In the ancient Vedic system, there was always a double sense, physical and psychological, outward and symbolic, the exterior form of the sacrifice, and the inner meaning of all its circumstances. But the secret symbolism of the ancient Vedic mystics, exact, curious, poetic, psychological, had been long forgotten by this time, and it is now replaced by another, large, general, and philosophical in the spirit of the Vedanta and a later yoga. The fire of sacrifice, Agni, is no material flame, but Brahman. So the fire of the yajna, of the sacrifice, Agni, is not a material flame, but Brahma Agni. It's the fire of the Brahman. It is the fire of the Brahman, or it is the Brahman word energy. Inner Agni, priest of the sacrifice into which the offering is poured. The fire is self-control, or it is a purified sense action, or it is the vital energy in that discipline of the control of the vital being through the control of the breath, which is common to Raja Yoga and Hatha Yoga. So this is extremely important to understand. You see, what is this yajna? What is this fire? What is this Agni that is constantly being invoked in the Vedas and then now in the Gita and all the time? If you notice even some of the meditations that the mother wrote about and did, the meditation of the Agni, of coming in touch with the inner fire and offering into it as an ahuti all our thoughts, all our emotions, all our everything. So this is an extremely important psychological and symbolic and subtle physical phenomenon that has to be understood to be able to sacrifice consciously. So let's read this again. The fire of sacrifice, Agni, is no material flame, but Brahma Agni, the fire of the Brahman, or it is the Brahman word Agni, inner Agni, priest of the sacrifice, into which the offering is poured. The fire is self-control. It's very important, this word self-control. Or it is a purified sense action. So this idea of the chariot, of the reins, of the mind being, there's a beautiful verse in the Vedas The idea that the sense action, the indriyas are controlled and kept under check, are not allowed to go wayward. And that is done by the fire of purification and Agni. And through the constant internal sacrifice that is required to transform these indriyas or these sense actions, or what they call is the purifying of the sense action. So, into which the offering is poured, the fire is self control, or it is a purified sense action, or it is the vital energy in that discipline of the control of the vital being through the control of the breath. So, pranayama. Through the control of the breath, one can control the vital being and discipline the vital energies and discipline all these outer sensory, this outer the seven, this the senses and the vital, the life force, the prana. And don't forget, the vital is the vehicle of desire, so it has an immediate effect on being able to sublimate, control, and offer the desires to the higher Agni or the Brahma Agni, rather than it going outward into the lower gunas of tamas, rajas, and sattva. So, or it is the purified sense action, or it is the vital energy in that discipline of the control of the vital being through the control of the breath, which is common to Raja Yoga and Hatha Yoga, or it is the fire of self-knowledge, the flame of the supreme sacrifice. So the importance, therefore, of self-control. So our desires are like the horses, or vital being of completely going, and then we need to rein in that, like the tortoise. So this is a very important image, and one needs to understand that, because otherwise we think that it is just there's no work. The work is of surrendering, but it's also of a certain discipline. So both of that need to go together. So, or it is a purified sense action, or it is the vital energy in that discipline of the control of the vital being through the control of the breath. That's why even Aurobindo in the beginning, for a long time, we used pranayama as one of the methods to control the vital, which is common to Raja Yoga and Hatha Yoga. But later, the mother said there is another way. So it's not that this is the only way. Okay? Or it is the fire of self-knowledge, the flame of the supreme sacrifice. However, there is a point where this is required and important. The food eaten, now this is important, the food eaten as the leavings of the sacrifice it is explained, the nectar of immortality, amrita, left over from the offering. Now what does this mean? The food eaten as the leavings of the sacrifice. What food is he talking about here? The food eaten as the leavings of the sacrifice it is explained, the nectar of immortality, amrita. This is the prasada. So, left over from the offering. So, after the offering, after the making sacred, after the igniting of the inner Agni and the psychological and the bringing together of the sense organs and the offering and the discipline, that prasad, that food left over after the offering, after the sacrifice, is the nectar of immortality, amrita, left over from the offering. And here we have still something of the old Vedic symbolism in which the Soma wine was the physical symbol of the Amrita. So the Soma wine in the Vedic symbolism was the physical symbol of the Amrita, the immortalizing delight of the divine ecstasy won by the sacrifice offered to the gods and drunk by men. The offering itself is whatever working of his energy. So what is the offering itself? Is whatever working of his energy, physical working, psychological, is consecrated by him in action of body or action of mind to the gods of God. So that is the offering. It is not the offering that you put in a havan. It is not the offering that you think of. It is everything. That making sacred and offering consciously into this Agni of what? The working of the energy, physical energy or psychological, consecrated by him in action of body or action of mind, to the gods or God, to the self or to the universal powers, to one's own higher self or to the self in mankind and in all existences. So, this elaborate explanation of the yajna sets out with a vast and comprehensive definition in which it is declared that the act and the energy and materials of the sacrifice, the giver and receiver of the sacrifice, the goal and object of the sacrifice are all the one Brahman. So this elaborate explanation of the yajna sets out with a vast and comprehensive definition, okay, in which the act and the energy and the materials of the sacrifice, and the giver of the sacrifice and the receiver of the sacrifice, the goal of the sacrifice and the object of the sacrifice are all one Brahman. Brahman is the giving, Brahman is the food offering, Brahman it is, by Brahman it is offered into the Brahman fire. Brahman is that which is to be attained by samadhi in Brahman action. Note the words, not leaving it. Brahman action. This then is the knowledge in which the liberated man has to do works. This then is the knowledge in which the liberated man has to do works of sacrifice. It is the knowledge declared of old in the great Vedantic utterances. I am He. All this verily is the Brahman. Brahman is the Self. It is the knowledge of the entire unity. It is the one manifest as the doer and the deed and the object of works, knower and knowledge and the object of knowledge, the universal energy into which the action is poured is the divine. The universal energy into which the action is poured is the divine. The consecrated energy of the giving is the divine. Whatever is offered is only some form of the divine. The giver of the offering is the divine. The giver of the offering is the divine himself in man. So this is the truth, this is the inversion. This is what we began with, that we have got everything upside down because of the ego. The giver of the offering is himself the divine in man. So the giver of the offering is the divine himself in man. The action, the work, the sacrifice is itself the divine in movement, in activity. The goal to be reached by sacrifice is the divine. For the man who has this knowledge and lives and acts in it, there can be no binding works, no personal and egotistically appropriated action. So for the man who has this knowledge that the divine is in the movement and the activity, the goal is to be reached by sacrifice is the divine, the offering is the divine, the person who is offering is also the divine in man, everything is the divine. That person who has this knowledge and lives and acts in it, there can be no binding works, no personal and egotistically appropriated action. There is only the divine Purusha acting by the divine Prakriti. So there is only the divine Purusha acting by the divine Prakriti. So the three modes, the lower Prakriti is changed into the higher Prakriti, Para Prakriti. So there is only the divine Purusha acting by the divine Prakriti in his own being, offering everything into the fire of his self-conscious cosmic energy. While the knowledge and the possession of his divine existence and consciousness by the soul unified with him is the goal of this God-directed movement and activity. So, let me read that again. So there is only the divine Purusha acting by the divine Prakriti in his own being, offering everything into the fire of his self-conscious cosmic energy, while the knowledge and the possession of his divine existence and consciousness by the soul unified with him is the goal of this God-directed movement and activity. To know that and to live and act in this unifying consciousness, to know that and to live and act in this unifying consciousness is to be free. But all even of the yogins have not attained to this knowledge. Again he said, but even the yogins, the yoga, those who are realized, self-realized beings have not attained to this knowledge. Some yogins follow after the sacrifice, which is of the gods. Others offer the sacrifice by the sacrifice itself into the Brahman fire. The former conceive of the divine in various forms and paths and seek him by various means, ordinances, dharmas, laws, or, as we might say, settled rites of action, self-discipline, consecrated works. For the latter, those who already know the simple fact of sacrifice, of offering whatever work to the divine itself, of casting all their activities into the unified divine consciousness and energy, is their one means, their one dharma. The means of sacrifice are various. Okay? The means of sacrifice are various. The offerings are of many kinds. There is the psychological sacrifice of self-control and self-discipline. which leads to the higher self-possession and self-knowledge. Some offer their senses into the fires of control. Some offer their senses, yes, 5 senses, into the fires of control. Others offer the objects of sense into the fires of sense. And others offer all the actions of the sense and all the actions of the vital force into the fire of the yoga of self-control kindled by knowledge. This is very important. This is the method. These are very, very important truths that Sri Aurobindo has brought out of the Gita that have not been revealed so far. And that is the beauty of this text. There is so much knowledge that he's pouring. It's almost like he is speaking through the voice of Sri Krishna. And Sri Krishna is revealing the secrets that in English language, that have not even been fully revealed in the Gita itself. So there is the psychological sacrifice of self-control and self-discipline, which leads to the higher self-possession and self-knowledge. Some offer their senses into the fires of control. Others offer the objects of sense into the fires of sense. And others offer all the actions of the sense and all the actions of the vital force into the fire of the yoga of self-control, kindled by knowledge. There is, that is to say, the discipline which reviews, there is, that is to say, the discipline which receives the objects of sense perception without allowing the mind to be disturbed. So this discipline of receiving the objects of sense perceptions without allowing the mind to be disturbed or affected by its sense activities, the senses themselves becoming pure fires of sacrifice. 5 senses themselves becoming pure fires of sacrifice. Just see what Sri Aurobindo is saying. Can you imagine that? This itself requires a lot of meditation. So, there is, that is to say, the discipline which receives the objects of sense perception without allowing the mind to be disturbed or affected by its sense activities. The senses themselves becoming pure fires of sacrifice. Your eyes, your ears, your hands, what are the senses? They themselves becoming pure fires of sacrifice. Smell, taste, the senses themselves becoming pure fires of sacrifice. There is the discipline which stills the senses, so that the soul in its purity may appear from behind the veil of mind action, calm and still. So there is a discipline which stills the senses, so that the soul in its purity may appear from behind the veil of mind action. Behind the veil of mind action, calm and still. There is the discipline by which, when the self is known, all the action of the sense perceptions and all the action of the vital being are received into that one still and tranquil So, the offering of the striver after perfection may be material and physical. Dravya yajna, which is dravya yajna, like that consecrated in worship by the devotee to his deity, or it may be the austerity of his self-discipline and energy of his soul directed to some high aim, tapoya, or it may be some form of yoga, like the pranayama of the Raja Yogis and Hatha Yogis, or any other yoga yajna. All these tend to be purification of the being. All sacrifice is a way towards the attainment of the highest. Shall we continue or stop?
Continue.
Yes. Well, I think we need to stop here for at least a year and absorb what we've just read and understand its implications. It is so dense and so rich and so powerful and so awesome that it's, I think this knowledge is not, I just cannot this is something that has to be really, really understood. And each sense of ours and each part of our being needs to understand this. I think a meditation on this is really required. Please read this again. We're not doing justice to it by just giving it one reading. It should be read and reread many, many times. Okay. The one thing needful, the saving principle, constant in all these variations. But I want to stop here for a moment. I want you to consider something. I'm going a little out of the text for a change. But I think it's very, very important. On the 24th of November, as you know, it was the Siddhi of Sri Aurobindo, Sri Krishna, as you know, descended into his body, so physical substance. It is important, you see, when you read the essays in the Gita, you get this impression. And I'm going to ask Anuradha to send this to you on WhatsApp. Anuradha, could you send that article that's coming out in our issue, in the Awakening Ray? I know I'm not supposed to send it out beforehand, but I'd really like you all to read this article. I think it will throw a lot of light on what we are reading and what we've just read. It's an article by Dr. Nirod Baran on a conversation he had with Sri Aurobindo while he was watching a film on the Mahabharata, and what Sri Aurobindo said to him. Please read it. Okay. Actually, I want to stop here because it's very, very full, and I think we really need to meditate. So I'm going to actually stop. And I want you to read this article. Can you put it on the WhatsApp? Yeah? We'll take it up next time. Besides, somebody or the other is going to walk in and say you're not allowed to talk. So I would have run away. Okay, have a good day. Bye. Should we do 1 minute of concentration? Okay, we should do that. So close your eyes and let us concentrate on the words we've just read and the ideas that Sri Aurobindo has just presented to us on the yajna, on Agni, on the purification of the senses, the idea of sacrifice, the psychological idea of sacrifice, and what it means and how it changes the entire thing. So we were on the significance of sacrifice, chapter 12, towards the end, page 21, but we'll go back to page 120. I actually want to start from 119, because there's such an important uh, concept and idea, and also experience, which is very important to understand. The fire of sacrifice, Agni, is no material flame, but Brahman, the fire of the Brahman, or it is the Brahman word energy, inner Agni, priest of the sacrifice. So the fire of the sacrifice that is being talked about in the Gita is not the physical fire, but the Brahmagni, the fire of the Brahman, or the Brahman word energy, inner Agni, priest of the sacrifice, into which the offering is poured. The fire is also self-control, or it is a purified sense action, or it is the vital energy in that discipline of the control of the vital being through the control of the breath, which is common to Raja Yoga and Hatha Yoga, or it is the fire of self-knowledge, the flame of the supreme sacrifice. The food eaten as the leavings of the sacrifice is, it is explained, the nectar of immortality, Amrita, left over from the offering. And here we have still something of the old Vedic symbolism in which the Soma wine was the physical symbol of the Amrita, the immortalizing delight of the divine ecstasy won by the sacrifice, offered to the gods and drunk by men. The offering itself is whatever working of his energy, physical or psychological, is consecrated by him in action of body or action of mind to the gods or God, to the self or to the universal powers, to one's own higher self, or to the self in mankind and in all existences. So, this elaborate explanation of the yagna sets out with a vast and comprehensive definition in which it is declared that the act and energy and materials of the sacrifice, receiver of the sacrifice, the goal and object of the sacrifice are all the one Brahman. Brahman is the giving, Brahman is the food offering. By Brahman it is offered into the Brahman fire. Brahman is that which is to be attained by Samadhi in Brahman action. Now, when we talk about, he says here, the food eaten as the leavings of the sacrifice, it is explained, is the nectar of immortality. What does it mean in a psychological way? I mean, one understands it in the physical way of the sacrifice that is made and the prasad and so on, what is left as the offering. But what does it mean on a spiritual, psychological way? If one had to do this in one's life, how would one do it? What is this? Um, the food eaten as the leavings of the sacrifice is the nectar of immortality, Amrita, left over from the offering. So what is left over from what is the prasad of our offering that is left over when we're doing work or physical in our physical life? Not in the sacrificial life, not in the Vedic sense, but in our physical life. Rohini, any insights?
I've been quite confused about this myself. I've wondered, is it aspiration?
So, hmm? The bliss is yes, it could be the bliss the delight, maybe the delight you get after you've sacrificed your work, your life, your thoughts, your energies, your actions, your food,
The
even in the
result,
physical sense. Yeah. Sorry?
the result of that offering.
Yeah. The result, this is nectar of immortality. That result of the offering is calling nectar of immortality. Why is he doing that?
So I was thinking of the Watchman ritual and trying to put, like you said, the life in the past and the body. So when I'm offering my work, or whatever I'm doing, I'm offering, and whatever, irrespective of what the outcome is, I'm accepting that
Hmm.
with the same,
Yeah.
like we said,
Yeah, the calm
yeah.
equanimity without desire attachment.
So that,
So,
like, because I'm trying to associate the prasad, because it's like if I'm offering and the prasad is coming to me out of that, so I'm trying to associate that with if I'm offering my work, but whatever comes back to me, the result, I take that with the same quality and
yeah.
like you said, yes. So
And so that becomes the nectar of immortality. He's used very big words here, you know. He says that firstly he talks about fire of self-control, then he talks about Brahman word energy, the inner Agni, then he talks about Brahma Agni, the fire of the Brahman. Then he says that however you do it, through self-control, through breath control, through sacrifice of one's works, one's thoughts, one's sense organs, through all, however you do it, the food eaten as the leavings of the sacrifice, he says, is the nectar of immortality. Amrita left over from the offering. And here we have still something of the old Vedic symbolism. So this idea that after you do that, what it does is it makes whatever you do, it divinizes it, changes its character, changes its consciousness, changes its, makes it pure, and this purity brings about what they call the soma wine or the nectar of immortality, because it takes you towards knowledge, self-knowledge, world knowledge. It takes you towards realization, and of course, when one is realized, one knows that one is not just a transient being. One lives in the soul and not in the body. So that immortality could be this aspect of knowing oneself completely. So this is why this is important to understand. Um, so this elaborate explanation of the yajna sets out with a vast and comprehension. So Brahman is the giving, Brahman is that is which is attained by samadhi in the Brahman action. This then is the knowledge in which the liberated man has to do works of sacrifice. It is the knowledge declared of old in the great Vedantic utterances. I am he. All this verily is the Brahman. Brahman is the self. So in a sense, even our indriyas, five senses, seven senses, or whatever you want to call them, the sight, the taste, the touch, the hearing, if one brings them, one realizes that they are also, when one starts offering whatever one sees and takes it to take makes one's poise up to a higher level of one's consciousness. Even those senses turn their material, gross character being, uh, which always wants to take, desire, attachment. It changes that movement towards what it calls as Brahma Agni or divine. Even the senses get divinized. So this is a very interesting thing. So once you are realized in the self, when you're seated in that consciousness of the spiritual being, then even your senses are purified and divinized. Okay? Then what this happens to you? Then you feel everything is the Brahman. The offering is the Brahman, the fire is the Brahman, the everything becomes that one divine. Okay? Yeah. All this verily is the Brahman. The Brahman is this self. And then the universal energy into which the action is poured is the divine. The consecrated energy of the giving is the divine. Whatever is offered is only some form of the divine. The giver of the offering is the divine himself in man. So then you realize you are not the doer, you are not the worker, you are not the giver even of your what you think you are offering your work. I am offering my work, I'm offering my food, I'm offering my life, I'm offering my thoughts, I'm offering my sight, my touch, my hearing, then that changes its character and you realize it is not me, but it is the Brahman which is offering it through this, that is the real self, and it is the ego that has got a false sense of identity that is attached to itself. So all this verily is the Brahman. The Brahman is the self. It is the knowledge of the entire unity. It is the one manifest as the doer and the deed, both the doer and the deed, and the object of work, knower and knowledge, and the object of knowledge. The universal energy into which the action is poured is the divine. The consecrated energy of the giving is the divine. Whatever is offered is only some form of the divine. The giver of the offering is the divine himself in man. The action, the work, the sacrifice is itself the divine in movement, in activity. The goal to be reached by sacrifice is the divine. For the man who has this knowledge and lives and acts in it, there can be no binding works, no personal and egotistically appropriated action. There is only the divine Purusha acting by the divine Prakriti in his own being, offering everything into the fire of his self conscious cosmic energy, while the knowledge and the possession of his divine existence and consciousness by the soul unified with him is the goal of all this God directed movement and activity. To know that and to live and act in this unifying consciousness is to be free. Okay, so we ended here, I think. Didn't we? So let's continue today. But all even of the yogins have not attained to this knowledge. Some yogins follow after the sacrifice, which is of the gods. Others offer the sacrifice by the sacrifice itself into the Brahman fire. The former conceive of the divine in various forms and paths and seek him by various means, ordinances, dharmas, laws, or as we might say, settled rites of action, self-discipline, consecrated works. For the latter, those who already know the simple fact of sacrifice, of offering whatever work to the divine itself, of casting all their activities into the unified divine consciousness and energy, is their one means, their one dharma. The means of sacrifice are various. The offerings are of many kinds. There is the psychological sacrifice of self-control and self-discipline, which leads to the higher self-possession and self-knowledge. So here he goes on to explain that there are many means of sacrifice, but the offering, whatever work, is to the divine itself. The idea of casting all our activities into the unified divine conscious and energies is the one means, the one that. So what is the one? There is the psychological sacrifice of self-control, self-discipline, which leads to the higher self-possession and self-knowledge. Some offer their senses into the fires of control. And very important. What is he meaning here? In quotation marks, a direct translation of the Sanskrit verse. Some offer their senses into the fires of control. Others offer the objects of sense into the fires of sense. And others offer all the actions of the sense and all the actions of the vital force into the fire of the yoga of self-control kindled by knowledge. So these indriyas, these senses, all our senses, offering of even the sense organs is an extremely important practice which leads towards self-control and self-discipline. Otherwise, it's extremely difficult to do this in a practical way. What kind of practice? How are we going to get into the state of, detachment, free from desire, self-denied, equanimous, calm, samatha? How do you get into that state? So this is one way. They're different. So one is offering your senses into the fires of control. Okay. Other, offering the objects of sense, that which you are looking at, the objects of your sense, that you desire, okay, into the fires of sense. What does that mean? Fires of sense. Fires of sense, the Brahma Agni. So, in a sense, even your indriyas, and let's use the word, a Sanskrit word because it becomes difficult. Even the fires of sense is the uh, the Agni that is in that you your all your indriyas, your sense or organs themselves turn into a sacrificial mode of self-giving and of offering to the divine. Is that clear? Or would anyone else like to elaborate on this? So, any example to understand this better?
No, I'm trying to grasp it.
Okay, so maybe a practical example can help.
The object of senses are when you say whatever you see, the object, whatever you
Yeah.
action. But when I offer my sense organs, so
So what?
am I trying to say that everything that I see here is going to be Brahman?
Yeah.
Is
That means that you offer your indriya, you let your actual senses, you bring them into a kind of a self-control and discipline. This maybe you require, it's not going to be easy. It's not done just through thought. It's done through various practices, meditation, pranayama, uh, yoga, Raja Yoga, and it's also done through an inner self-giving and turning of one's understanding that these senses themselves these indriyas themselves can be offered and become part of the sacrificial fire. So, for example, if one is eating food, what is the sense that you're using? The sense of taste? Okay, so how do you turn that sense of taste into what he's calling here, um, and all the actions, the vital force into no, before that. Some offer the senses into fire, the objects of the sense into the fires of sense. So the object of the sense is the food, right? The tasting is the action of the sense that is tasting. Now, how do you change that? How do you do that? The fire of you, actions of the sense and all the actions of the vital force into the fire of the yoga of self-control, kindled by knowledge. So it is actually you are then, when you're eating, this sense that it is not you that is eating, it is the divine that you are giving the food to. The taste, then your indriyas of taste then become completely offered and consecrated to the divine. Now, I only very now it keeps recurring to me, and I wish I had listened more closely. But whenever I used to have tea at Golkund, in those days, Udar Pinto, used to be there. And as you know, he spent a lot of time with the mother. And he used to only repeat one thing all the time when we were having tea. He says, you know what the mother used to tell me? That when you eat, and you eat your breakfast, so he would go into jam and toast and all the things he used to eat. So when you eat your food, do not think that you are eating. Eat as though you are eating with me and for me, and let me eat it. Yeah, yeah. So you change the divine presence in you. So the mother used to tell him that. So he said he started this practice in his own way. So he used to keep talking about the delight he's getting now, and that he's the whole method and the whole way of eating has changed. So why we are looking at this is because this is something that can go into various levels of depth, but at a very simple level. This is how you can start the practice.
Amita, another very important thing is that when we are very still ourselves, when we are very still and we're very calm inside, then all the indriyas get heightened.
Mm,
Like you brought up Golkond, it's such a good example because even one's listening over there is deeper. Everything is deeper. So I
mm.
think the most important part is to block out the
Noise.
restlessness and the noise and to just go into a real deep stillness. And then
Mm,
automatically they heighten.
mm. So after the heightening, Rohini, the next step is the turning of that heightening of the senses to the divine.
May I add,
No?
Amita?
Yes, yes, I'm talking about it.
So is this aspect of where through self-control, because the first step is self-control, what they're describing is self-control. And next is where the senses themselves become the fire. That, that the senses become so refined and purified that when you take in something, whether visually or sight or taste, the senses kind of either purify it or reject it without intervention of the mind. It's like in the body itself, the senses themselves can either purify it, like if you eat street food and you will not get any infection from it, for example, and or they reject it. That
Mm,
I understand as the next step after self control.
mm. But
Yeah.
how does it purify? How do the senses purify? By what action of the senses?
First is the self control.
Yeah. So of the turning of that and the self-giving of that to the divine, right?
I have a kind of a question and a thought. Um, on that same statement, into the fires of self-control. I was just thinking, where does self-control happen in us? And when is an action where we actually have to control ourselves? Where actually is what's actually happening inside us? And I think it has to do with our will, our determination. We have to know what we're doing. We have to be doing this offering, but what in us is doing that offering?
So the
And I think
self-control
that's
is.
what the fire is. That's what appears to me to be the fire.
Mhm. Yes, it has a lot to do with the will that can bring about self-control, but the will itself is turned towards uh, the
Turned
divine,
upwards.
upwards.
And
Yes, the
doesn't
higher.
that happen here? It happens in this higher region of our
Yeah, where's
anatomy, psychic
about the
and
sense.
physical.
So yes, so now anyway, I wanted to just dwell on this. I think that's clear now. Some offer their senses into the fires of control. Others offer the objects of sense into the fires of sense. And others offer all the actions of the sense and all the actions of the vital force into the fire of the yoga of self-control, kindled by knowledge. There is, that is to say, the discipline which receives the objects of sense perception without allowing the mind to be disturbed or affected by its sense activity, the senses themselves becoming pure fires of sacrifice. There is the discipline which stills the senses so that the soul in its purity may appear from behind the veil of mind action, calm and still. There is the discipline by which, when the self is known, all the actions of the sense perceptions and all the action of the vital being are received into that one still and tranquil soul. So this, it is the stilling of the senses that allows the soul to come forward in its purity from behind the veil of mind action. So the mind is quieted, the senses are stilled, and then that allows the inner being to come forward. There is the discipline by which, when the self is known, all the actions of the sense perceptions and all the action of the vital being are received into that one still and tranquil soul. The offering of the striver after perfection may be material and physical, dravyayam, like that consecrated in worship by the devotee to his deity, or it may be the austerity of his self-discipline and energy of his soul directed to some high aim, tapoyam, or it may be some form of yoga like the pranayama or of the Raja Yogins and Hatha Yogins, or other yoga yajna. All these tend to the purification of the being. All sacrifice is a way towards the attainment of the highest. The one thing needful, the saving principle constant in all these variations, is to subordinate the lower activities, to diminish the control of desire and replace it by a superior energy. So the one thing needful in the saving principle, constant in all these variations and methods that we've read about above in this previous paragraph, is the subordination of the lower activities and the diminution of the control of desire and replacement of these lower activities replace it by a superior energy or consciousness, to abandon the purely egoistic enjoyment. So to abandon the purely egoistic enjoyment, so that diviner delight which comes by sacrifice, by self-dedication, by self-mastery, by the giving up of one's lower impulses to a greater and higher aim. So this is very, very important. That absolute stillness, that absolute calm, and then the giving up and constant offering of the lower to the higher, and the, to abandon the egoistic enjoyment for the divine delight which comes by sacrifice, that which has been offered, by self-dedication, by self-mastery, by the giving up of one's lower impulses to a greater and higher aim. In quotation marks, another direct translation of the shloka, they who enjoy the nectar of immortality left over from the sacrifice attain to the eternal Brahman. You see again. They who enjoy the nectar of immortality left over from the sacrifice attain to the eternal Brahman. Sacrifice is the law of the world, and nothing can be gained without it. Nothing can be gained without sacrifice. Neither mastery here, nor the possession of heavens beyond, nor the supreme possession of all. This world is not for him who doeth not sacrifice. How then any other world? So that is the principal law of life. This world is not for him who doeth not sacrifice. How then any other world? You only have a choice whether you want your sacrifice to become conscious or you want to be forced into an unconscious sacrifice. All right? So sacrifice the law of the world. This world is not for him who doeth not sacrifice. How then any other world? What is what are we speaking of other worlds when this world itself is not for him who doeth not sacrifice. So in the other world, certainly there is no such place for a person who does not do sacrifice. Therefore, all these and many forms of sacrifice have been extended in the mouth of the Brahman. The mouth of that fire, that Agni, which receives all offerings. So in the end, this sacrifice, making sacred, offering, whether you're doing it consciously or unconsciously, whether you know that you're doing it or you don't know that you're doing it, whether is the offering in the mouth of the Brahman. You see, this, therefore, all these and many other forms of sacrifice have been extended in the mouth of the Brahman, the mouth of that fire which receives all offerings. They are all means and forms of the one great existence in activity, means by which the action of the human being can be offered up to that of which his outward existence is a part and with which his inmost self is one. So, this mouth of this fire which receives all offerings, these are means and forms of the one great existence, paraprakriti, inactivity, nature, means by which the action of the human being can be offered up to that of which his outward existence is a part, and with which his inmost self is one. They are all born of work, all proceed from and are ordained by the one vast energy of the divine, which manifests itself in the universal karma and makes all the cosmic activity a progressive offering to the one self and Lord, and of which the last stage for the human being is self knowledge and the possession of the divine or the Brahmic consciousness. So they are all born of work. All this, all the sacrifices, all the means that the human being can offer, that offering, they're all born of work, all proceed from, and are ordained by the one vast energy of the divine, which manifests itself in the universal karma and makes all the cosmic activity a progressive offering to the one self, all the cosmic activity, a progressive offering to the one self and Lord, and of which the last stage for the human being is self knowledge and the possession of the divine or Brahmic consciousness. So knowing, thou shalt become free. That is what, so knowing that, thou shalt become free. But there are gradations in the range of these various forms of sacrifice. What are the gradations in the various forms of sacrifice? The physical form of sacrifice is the lowest grade. The physical offering, the lowest. The sacrifice of knowledge, the highest. Knowledge, now what is knowledge? When you say, we just said thought sacrifice of works would be the highest. But here, Sri Aurobindo is making a distinction. He's saying sacrifice of knowledge is the highest. So then we have to ask, what is knowledge? Knowledge is that in which all this action culminates. So all the works, all this action culminates in knowledge. That knowledge is talking about is the highest form of sacrifice. So knowledge is that in which all this action culminates. Not any lower knowledge, like to know the way we look at knowledge, but the highest self-knowledge and God knowledge, divine knowledge. That which we can learn from those who know the true principles of existence, that by possessing which we shall not fall again into the bewilderment of the mind's ignorance and into its bondage to mere sense knowledge and to the inferior activity of the desires and passions. So that is the highest form of sacrifice. When we are able to attain to this God knowledge, to this divine knowledge, that knowledge that does not allow, that removes the inferior activity of desires and passion, that knowledge that is no longer bondage to the mere sense knowledge and to the inferior activity of the desires and passions, the knowledge in which all culminates is that by which thou shalt see all existences, becomings, bhutani, without exception in the self. So that is the knowledge that he's talking about. That is the highest. That knowledge by which thou shalt see all existences, becomings, bhutani, without exception in the self. That then in me, Krishna. For the self is that one, immutable. So what is the self? With a capital S is that one, immutable, all-pervading, all-containing, self-existent reality, or Brahman, hidden behind our mental being, into which our consciousness widens out when it is liberated from the ego. So when our consciousness is liberated from the ego, and and then that self which is hidden behind the mental being comes forward. So that is the self. For the self is that one immutable, all-pervading, all-containing, self-existent self, reality or Brahman, hidden behind our mental being, into which our consciousness widens out. When it is liberated from the ego, we come to see all beings as becomings, Bhutan, within that one self-existence. But this self, or immutable Brahman, we see too to be the self-presentation to our essential psychological consciousness of a Supreme Being. So, firstly, to understand the gradations and the range of sacrifices, starting from the physical, and then the highest being knowledge, but the way to gain that self knowledge and knowledge of the divine and live in that is through action and works. And then that helps the bewilderment moment we know the true principles of existence, and that by possessing which we shall not fall again into the bewilderment of the mind's ignorance and the bondage of sense knowledge and to the inferior activities of desires and passions. The knowledge in which all culminates, that all existence then becomes the self, and so on. For the self is that one all-containing self-existent reality, Brahman. And hidden behind that, where is the self? How do you find it? It's after the ego, when the consciousness widens out, is liberated from the ego, and behind the mental being, that self then comes forward. We come to see all beings as becomings, Bhutani, within the one self-existence. But this self, or immutable Brahman, we see too to be the self-presentation to our essential psychological consciousness of a supreme being who is the source of our existence and of whom all that is mutable or immutable is the manifestation. He is God, that same self. He is that is mutable and immutable and is the supreme being. So that self then connects you directly with the supreme being. And he is God, the divine, the Purusha. To him we offer everything as a sacrifice. Into his hands we give up our actions. In his existence we live and move, unified with him in our nature and with all existence in him. We become one soul and one power of being with him and with all beings. The moment one widens, one becomes one power of being with him and simultaneously with all beings. The being and becoming one, there's a complete universalization of our consciousness and an identification with the Supreme, and then you become one, which is called unity, self-identity. So his supreme reality, we become one power of being with him and with all beings. With his supreme reality, we identify and unite our self-being. By works done for sacrifice, eliminating desire, we arrive at knowledge and at the soul's possession of itself. By works done in self-knowledge and God knowledge, we are liberated into the unity, peace, and joy of the divine existence. That brings us to the end of chapter 12. The next chapter 13 is the Lord of the sacrifice. And here was the significance of the sacrifice. Why do we need to sacrifice? Significance. And then we come to the Lord of the sacrifice. And therefore, we have, before we can proceed further, to gather up and so. So would you like to do that next time? Or this time, would you like to dwell on, or do you want me to read a paragraph, or a discussion, or what would you like to do? I think this is an extremely important chapter, the significance of sacrifice. And to understand that deeply, deeply, the deeper one goes into its understanding, the more one can begin to practice it. And the real value of this chapter is in its practice. Any comments or questions or ideas?
Yeah, I had a thought. When we do that, when we offer everything to the divine, and we feel like we've consecrated our actions and so on internally, then I was just thinking about the state that we live in and that the way events unfold for us in our lives. It's actually the hand of the divine working in our life. And that's what enables us to feel joy and freedom.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about that being the descent of grace. And I was wondering if that isn't the soma, that it's
The nectar.
we earn it, not that we won, that we're working for that, but that's what happens, is it's an automatic action that when we turn over everything, then the divine takes care of us rather than us trying to have to take care of ourselves. And it does so through this action. It can, because it can manage everything in our lives. It can take care of things that we can't manage. And so we don't live for ourselves anymore.
Yes.
God, just
And
just a
it's
thought.
absolutely right. And therefore, if one correlates what we've read to what you're saying and also to what the mother has been saying, in her simple ways when she talks to the children, when she gave talks, her conversations and her notes, she constantly says the most simple things and which have very profound meaning. She just says, remember me, remember and offer. And each time you call the highest and offer your work or your thought or your action to the highest, then you open yourself to the divine grace, and the best happens to you, and you are taken to your destiny and to your path. And so that very simple action of remembering and offering really actually comes from this karma yogic idea of sacrifice, because it is making sacred. When you remember and offer, what are you doing? You're making sacred. Making sacred your life, your thoughts, your food, your actions. And when you make sacred an offer, you are, as you said, opening to the divine grace. And when you open to the divine grace, then that carries you ahead. So there is
Mm.
this simple, there are two paths. And it's very interesting. Sri Aurobindo followed the first path, which is the path of the Gita, which is through the higher mental, the spiritual consciousness and the overhead consciousness. And he brought his lower, through self-control, self discipline, pranayama, Raja Yogic practices, and so on. He was able to do what the mother spoke about later as the sunlit path. And she said, I'll make it easier for you. I'm, after all, the mother. So then she brought in this element of the psychic being and the psychic consciousness and the sense of the remembering and offering, which is from the heart, but which doesn't mean that there is no self-control and no self-discipline. The problem is that once you think that if you don't amalgamate both these practices together, you could be delusional, self-delusional. And it's important to keep that in your mind, that this remember and offer it has to be a very pure practice. It has to be a very disciplined practice. It has to be a very conscious and concentrated practice for it really to have the same effect as what we've just read, of the purification of the senses, of the turning of the senses into what Sri Aurobindo calls, or Sri Krishna calls as, the Brahma Agni, of the Indriyas itself, and the stillness that it produces in the entire being. Because remember and offer cannot really be done with an active, noisy mind and consciousness. So I think both these practices are very interesting and important, and they need to both be um, coalesced or brought together. So shall we end here then, and we'll do it next time? Let's practice this week. Okay. Concentrate.
Ma'am, can I ask a question?
Yes.
So ma'am, when Sri Aurobindo tells us that, you should look up to the mother for inspiration and aspiration to do the work, and find her in, in your offerings. So does he mean it metaphorically, or
The Divine Mother.
the so then it's not Brahman, then it's the Divine Mother. Means is it the Prakriti, is the feminine force, or getting a little confused, or just you the divine as a mother figure?
There's no difference. It
There's
is
no
the Brahma.
Okay.
When you get to that experience, it's the same.
Okay.
It is just that, there is the Supreme has two poises of Purushan and Prakriti, or Shakti, and so it is the, when one can proceed any way one wants. You could go upwards or you could go inwards and go through the Supreme Mother or the Supreme Shakti or the Supreme Purusha. Purushottam. So in the Gita, it's more the Purushottam. In Sri Aurobindo's Yoga, it's the Shakti that is the real power that you bring. So, yeah. But the experience, the actual experience is the same. Just the way.
Thank you.
Okay. Good day. Bye.